think we've probably got most people who are going to be attending here in the auditorium, so we'll get the event underway. I'd like to welcome you all here today. Oh, you can't hear? It's not working? Is it possible to adjust the position? Oh, there we go. All right, is that better? Everyone can hear? Terrific. All right, so I'd like to welcome you all here today to our event entitled Indian Residential Schools Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Policy Change in Canada. This event is brought to you in cooperation by IPAC and Dene Naho, with participation by the Yellowknives Dene First Nation. My name is Matt Young. I'm a director and past chair of IPAC in the Northwest Territories. And with me today is Nina Larson from Dene Naho, and she'll be up to speak to you in just a moment. As many of you know, the Institute of Public Administration of Canada is a national organization dedicated to excellence in public service. One of the principal initiatives of IPAC NWT is to organize locally relevant events on public policy and public administration themes, and that's what we're here for today. And this truly is a relevant event for IPAC and a relevant event here in the Northwest Territories. A truth that we must acknowledge from the outset is that public administrators, just like us, were responsible for the establishment and in many respects the operation of the residential school system in Canada. As public servants dedicated to excellence, this dark chapter in our professional history must be acknowledged. It's something that we must come to terms with, learn from, and make amends for. In this regard, I look forward to hearing from Dr. Wilson on what is necessary to achieve reconciliation and the objectives of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in terms of policy change in Canada and her views on the prospects of this occurring. I'd like to, in a moment, my colleague Nina Larson will make some further remarks and introductions. But before that, I'd like to say how honored IPAC NWT is to be hosting this particular presentation in collaboration with Dene Naho and with the participation of the Yellowknives Dene First Nation. It takes a great deal of hope and trust, I think, for them to do that with us here today, and we'll strive to live up to their expectations. Before I turn the podium over to Nina, I'd like to encourage you all to listen attentively to Dr. Wilson and save your questions for the conclusion of the presentation, when there will be a question and answer period. Please also note that this session is being video recorded, our first video recorded session, in order to make it available to participants, members, and Aboriginal government officials across the Northwest Territories shortly thereafter. Security officer today has reminded me to remind you that the emergency exits today are here to my right, where you entered, and there's another one by the stairs over here. Please do not park in the emergency lane in front of the building, and if you have, you could relocate to the visitor parking over a little further from the entrance of the ledge. First aid area is over here at the main security desk, and the washrooms are located just past the cafeteria over here to my left. Finally, I'd like to briefly acknowledge several IPAC NWT board members who are present here today, and without whom events like this would not be possible. Amongst them are Christian Bertelson, Chair of IPAC NWT, Dennis Marchiori, Jennifer Whitaker, Jane Cooey, Olivia Krinska, Shannon Crawley, Laura Duncan, Sherry Lovely, Sylvia Hayner, and Tim Mercer. And also Penny Valentine, President, and David Brock, Director of IPAC National. With that, I turn the podium over to Nina.
Hello everyone. We will begin this event with the Yellowknife First Nation drummers.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our traditional territory, which we call Chief Vegas territory. I'm Edward Singers, Chief of Yellowknife Dene. No, one of these kinds of events is very important to our people, because we are following our ancestors' protocol that we welcome everybody into our territory, and is reflective on when our ancestors made a treaty in 1900, Treaty of Spirit of Intent Cooperation. They told us to share what we have with our newcomers. But there comes a time when we've been oppressed and exploited by society. And I think it's what time that we reconcile and make up for our differences in the past, the views from other people on how we carry out our tradition and our values that we have grown up and kept since time immemorial. When we do our prayer song for the things that are being carried out today, that we know the truth, we look forward to reconciling with the very people that have brought these things upon us. And it's important to ask the Creator to look out all the people on this earth, to forgive one another. We need to ask the Creator to look after our people, the world that we live in, as evident by the many changing things that we are experiencing today. So with that, we'd like to do our prayer song. We ask the Creator to give the blessing to the people, to our elders who are in need, and to our youth who are lost in the diversity of the culture that is forced upon them. We ask the Creator to give safe passage to those who have traveled. We ask the Creator to look upon us so we can all move forward to do things that we want to achieve today. Mercy. God's children. Let all their children as long as God's children. Let all their children as long as God's children. That's it. What's easy?
I would like to acknowledge that we are on Alkitu territory. Thank you for letting us share this land with you. My name is Nina Larson. I'm a member of the Buchin First Nation, and here today as a founding member of the Ninaho. The Ninaho is led by its founding member, and I would like to take the opportunity to recognize some of the other founding members who are present in the room. Kyla Kathy Scott, Mila Nakeko, Mandy McDonald, and Heather Nakeko. We are also pleased to introduce Iris Catholic, our first-time full staff member. She recently moved here from the community of Otoke, and her role is to direct our projects, help us grow and connect with people throughout the NWT, and ensure that as a group we are more inclusive in our mandate. The Ninaho's mission is to advance social and environmental justice for Northern peoples while promoting Indigenous leadership by fostering emerging leaders. We strive to live, learn, and celebrate our cultures, languages, and Indigenous values on the land, guided by our elders to strengthen relationships in the North and create long-term positive change. The Ninaho is proud to partner with IPAC and WT in highlighting the importance of implementing the recommendation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission through public policy. We value the work of the TRC and the contributions of Dr. Wilson to the country and to the North. We encourage all those who have not read the final report and its 94 recommendations to do so, and to take this opportunity to reflect on the role that we all have in rectifying the cultural genocide committed. It is fitting to welcome Dr. Wilson to this event. As many of you know, she is dedicated to excellence. Mary Wilson brings to her role as commissioner more than 30 years of experience as an award-winning journalist, trainer, and senior executive manager. She also been a university lecturer, a high school teacher in Africa, a senior executive manager in both federal and territorial crown corporations, and an independent consultant in journalism, program evaluation, and program management. As a journalist, Ms. Wilson worked in print, radio, and television as a regional and national reporter. She was the first host of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's flagship television program, Focus North, and the corporation's senior management for Northern Quebec and the Northwest Territories. As a regional director for the CBC, she launched the first daily television news service for Northern Canada and developed the Arctic Winter Games and True North concert series. She delivered training to the South African Broadcasting Corporation during the country's transition to democracy, and served as an associate board member of what became the Aboriginal People's Television Network, ABTN. Ms. Wilson is the recipient of many awards, including an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from St. Thomas University in Fredericton. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mary Wilson.
Hi everybody, I'm Marie, and I see both microphones. I want to add my acknowledgement of where we are on traditional Treaty 8 territory, homeland of the official, and thank you so much to Sanders for not only the beautiful prayer song, but also the teaching that was part of that and that was offered. And we acknowledge as well the shared homeland with the Métis and with the neighboring Treaty 8 peoples of the North, and the now shared homeland with people from all over the world and many parts of the North. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the organizers of this event, not only for their thoughtfulness in inviting me, but the vision behind the dialogue. I feel in a way that funny feeling where, to some degree, you're preaching to the converted, because I feel so proud of the leadership role that the North has played in many, many ways, and I'll have more to say about that as I move on in my remarks. But let me, if I may, say that some of what I am going to share with you will be very familiar to some of you. And on the other hand, in the now hundreds of presentations that we've given in all parts of the country, we also know that there are always in the room people who are coming new to the story, who don't even know that we have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, much less where it came from or where it is now hopefully leading us. And so I will touch on some of that context as well as a reminder to some of you and perhaps as important context for others. But I want to say that when I think of social policy or public policy, as it's also called, I think immediately of social justice. Because what otherwise is the point of public policy except to organize and structure us? What is the public good and the point of it all? And as I say, I was raised in the belief that public policy in our Canadian democratic state is fundamentally meant to be about social justice, about creating and enacting laws and policies that will ensure the freedoms, the equity of resources, and the equality of opportunities that are essential ingredients, not only of social justice, but of social peace. Yet so many of us in Canada still have a lot to learn about the dire need for social justice right here under our collective noses. We're very attuned to the need for social justice in other parts of the world, in crisis points and crisis moments, but sometimes blind to what is in our midst. And especially, as I often say, here in our own country, where we celebrate in our very words, in our very national song, the true north, strong and free. So what I want to share today is really a lot of my own reflections about public policy as a vehicle for social justice, and also to explore what we might call one of the newest synonyms of social justice, and that is reconciliation. How do we make that be something real and profound and ongoing, and not, as I one time heard a very prominent civil servant in Ottawa say, a flavor of the month. As you all know, we are in the season of remembrance. And like many of you, I'll spend tomorrow and all the days of this week and the days leading up to it in loving remembrance of my father, my grandfather, many uncles, many family friends, and many other family members who spent key years of their own youth in the midst of great and terrible wars. And today I'm wearing my Remembrance Day poppy, which several of you have commented on already, with my Truth and Reconciliation pin attached to it. Because I want to symbolize it in that way for you, that there are other conflicts that belong to this country, ones that still wait to be remembered. They were not called war, but they might as well have been for the damage done and the traumas still carried invisibly in our society today, and sometimes not so invisibly. And I'm talking about, of course, the 7 generations of state-sponsored, it was important what Matthew said at the beginning, state-sponsored, policy-based residential schooling for Aboriginal children in Canada. And before anyone says too quickly that there's no comparison between school and war, in many aspects, of course there is not, but let us also remember together in this moment the conservatively estimated 4,000 little children who died in those residential schools or shortly after leaving them. In some cases, parents also died before ever finding out what happened to their child, the cause of death, or even where they were buried, and some families still live with that unknowing. As we have acknowledged the unknown soldier, so too might we acknowledge the unknown child, 4,000 and counting, as the records slowly but surely become available from the government and the churches who ran the residential schools for almost 150 years. 4,000 children, also lest we forget. And when I say that we are in the season of remembrance, I also mean it in this sense. Remembering, putting our member parts back together again, putting the parts of ourselves back together again, putting the parts of our country back together again. You might say healing Canada from its own brokenness. We are still in the very early stages of a tremendous healing and remembering opportunity. And we owe that opportunity through two emerging forces, and one of them was not political will. The first is the evolution of Canadian laws and courts, and the second was the courage and the voice of 80,000 survivors of the so-called Indian residential schools, which also housed, as we well know here, many Métis and Inuit children. It has been a gradual emergence over the past several decades. After the Second World War, there were critical new developments in international law, those acknowledging fundamental human rights with the United Nations Declaration. Subsequent changes in Canadian law reinstated the right to Indigenous people to vote in 1960. And with that came a new framework for First Peoples to appear before Canadian courts as voting citizens. The 1970s paved the way for patriation of the Constitution of Canada from Great Britain to here. And when that happened in the early 1980s, the highest law in our land, the Canadian Constitution Act, was amended to recognize the rights of three founding peoples, English, French, and Indigenous, referred to in the Constitution Act as the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, specifically First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And then came the 1990s, and new voices of great courage, which began speaking up for the first time. Some 80,000 survivors of the schools still living in our midst at that time. First, there were several individual legal actions, one of the very prominent ones here in the north, and these eventually grew into larger class actions in every region of the country. And finally, these combined into one massive class action, and what stands today still as the largest class action lawsuit and out-of-court settlement in the history of our country. The suit was brought against not only the federal government, but 4 churches. It takes a lot of courage to be the underdog, the victim of harms, to stand up and say, and take on the government and the 4 national churches that were founding partners in our country. But in the case of the schools, they also ran the schools on contract to the government, these being several entities of the Catholic churches, the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglican Church of Canada, the United Church of Canada, and the Presbyterian Church in Canada. The 2007 Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement grew out of that court action, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was one of the terms and conditions of settlement. Unlike any other TRC in the world, it was not, I repeat, a public policy initiative born out of political goodwill. For the past 6.5 years, our commission has operated as an independent commission paid for out of the survivors' settlement monies from their court action. Very importantly, the TRC is not a government-sponsored commission. Therefore, the response from various governments, including our own here, becomes hugely important, both symbolically and in terms of what's possible going forward. Our job at the TRC since 2009 has included 3 very broad obligations. The first about truth-telling and learning. And it's not that these were sequential and that we finished one, checked it off, and moved on to the next. They are all on a continuum, and they all still continue. But the first was truth-telling and learning, to research, gather, record, and preserve for posterity the complete history of residential schools in Canada. Our primary resources were masses of written documents in federal government and church archives, and you may have read or heard a lot about some of our challenges in getting those flowing. But also to create what had been previously non-existent, and that is a new oral history, an oral record, and that was done through all the statement gathering in every region of the country to record the lived experiences of the children in the schools. Also workers or administrators, to the extent that they were available and willing to come forward, and throughout the country. There were almost 150 acknowledged schools throughout the country. We know there were many more than that, but those were the ones that were acknowledged in the settlement agreement. We've recorded almost 7,000 statements. So if you think about 70,000 or so people still alive, that's a huge sampling. I see Lois Little there. She would know all about that. That's a very big sampling, and certainly enough to assure us that these are not occasional opinions or incidental activities, but the common thread of a shared experience. Our second broad area of TRC work has been about educating and remembering, both for now and for the future. Finding ways to educate all Canadians about the truth of this history, which most of us were not taught growing up. Learning our lessons from the past and making informed recommendations going forward. That's what we are in the midst of. And making sure that we never forget this history or allow any future government to deny it or pretend it did not happen in this country. And that was to be done by establishing a National Research Centre, which is now known as the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. It is officially open and functioning and switched on, nctr.ca. If you haven't had a chance to look, it flipped its web switch, if I can put it that way, last Wednesday in front of almost 2,000 young people. And it is a virtual repository that will be available through many partner agencies right across the country. The third broad area of our work is in a way like a ribbon that runs through all of the other parts. And what I'm talking about there is healing and reconciliation. We've tried to contribute to this and to facilitate it by being very careful about how we did our work, by creating safe and culturally respectful opportunities for those affected to be heard and to be supported, and for others to bear witness to these new truths, to be inspired to take action in the spirit of reconciliation. And we've seen countless examples of actions for reconciliation now across the country. We've seen and approached our work as if trying to plant the seeds of new relationships, the possibilities for new relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. And we live kind of in a skewed reality here in Yellowknife, but even so, it's possible to live in Yellowknife and know little to nothing about the rest of the Northwest Territories. It's possible to live in Yellowknife and know and associate with no Indigenous peoples. And I've seen generations of such people come and go over the years, so I know it's possible. We need relationships in order to feel that it's worth our while and our effort to come together, to be together, and to function supportively together. So we also contributed to this ongoing work through a number of activities that were prescribed to us. We've had hundreds of community hearings across the country, over 300. We held 7 very high-profile national events, and a few of you may even have been fortunate enough to attend the second one, which was held in Inuvik. But they were held for 4 days in various regions of the country. We've had countless public speaking opportunities, outreach to youth, almost 15,000, well now it would be 17,000 young people. High schools across the country have been part of our work. And strategic engagement with some 75 or so influential and diverse Canadians known as TRC honorary witnesses. You'll see and hear from one of those in the video that I would like to share with you if time allows, so let me move on. I'll say that my own understanding of reconciliation has evolved since our work began. We started off by saying it's about respect and respectful relations. Very quickly for me, I was saying that it's also about peace. Peace in ourselves, in our self-regard, in our relationships at home, in our relationships in community and within the country. But it is also about change. It is fundamentally about change, because if none of those things change, nothing else will change. So my changed thinking, my evolving thinking has really come from hearing so many voices of remorse and regret from other Canadians, and from hearing voices of resilience, wisdom, and hope from both survivors and other Canadians. So let me address, first of all, reconciliation. I think it's about who we are. Identifying and then perhaps redefining who we are. Facing the truth of who we have been and what we have done. We cannot undo that, but we cannot deny it or ignore the harsh truths we have heard, and we cannot unknow them. We were scared, lonely, ashamed, angry. I hated my mother. I hated being Indian. I didn't know who I was. I lost my innocence, my childhood, my family, my identity. I didn't know where I fit in. I didn't care who I hurt. I didn't know how to parent. I didn't know how to love anyone else. I didn't know how to love me. I didn't know how to take care of me or anyone else. I hated white people. I hated everyone. I hated myself. Reconciliation is about facing the truth of who we have been. Reconciliation is also about where we are. We are in a time and place of slowly but surely healing. Before residential school, I knew who the Creator was, long before I went to school. I knew my language, I knew our songs. I knew how to ask for help. I knew who I was in my language and in my culture. Once I got my culture back, I felt proud again. I felt like I was somebody. Individuals are doing that healing work. Families are doing that healing work. Some churches are doing that work. Some departments of education and professional faculties and professional associations are doing that work. Our new national government has committed to doing that work. But no matter where we are on political promises, our country still has a lot of work to do to rebuild trust and to forge new relationships. Reconciliation, I believe, is also about what we are. We are a country faced with the historic opportunity to reclaim the Canada of our stated values. Thanks to the expanding national dialogue that the TRC has contributed to and helped to make possible. Here are what some survivors have said on reconciliation. How do we move ahead? We need to talk. My father said, if the white man could understand me the way I understand the white man, then we could get along. We do not want a white man's system to trump our indigenous systems and beliefs and cultural practices. We need to look at common spaces, ethical spaces, to look at the parallels between the two, and to find the best practices between the two. We need to bring our own cultural practices and beliefs of who we are to that, and use parallels on common ethical ground to move ahead. I still remember the day I heard that elder and traditional knowledge keeper say those words. It was at a hearing in Calgary, in Treaty 7 area, the Blood Reserve, and it was the very last of our community-based hearings. And of course, that's the largest reserve in Canada, you may not realize. And I remember thinking at the time that this was the perfect recipe for public policy deliberations, to find the best practices between the two and use parallels on common ethical ground to move ahead. Other survivors have put it perhaps less poetically, but in the same spirit, with calls for a government-to-government relationship. And still others with a much more pared-down personal declaration, I want my identity back. Is that too much to ask? In her book, So Far From Home, author and anthropologist Margaret J. Wheaton probes what is essentially the same issue of identity. And she says, throughout history, human identities have been a natural consequence of where people were born, their tribe, community, culture. Who we were was never a question. We naturally learned the ways of our people and participated in our culture, unaware that there were other ways to live. Cultural identity is a great cohering influence on people. It binds us together with a shared lens for interpreting life and deciding our actions. It offers stable ground to stand on in the midst of chaos. I can relate to that statement, that longing for shared identity and stable ground as a point of reference, and I imagine most of you can too. I think that explains why we have family and school reunions, why we have hometown teams, why we spot and speak to fellow Canadians when we travel, why elderly people, such as my mother, have chosen to grow up old with the friends of their own generation. After all, they grew up with the same music, the same dances, the same war stories, the same hairstyles. And since we already know these things, it begs this very fundamental question, which I think is so pertinent to this gathering and to the question that you have put before me and to yourselves. Knowing this, why did we go to such extremes to remove children from their stable ground, from the safety and identity of their parents, their families, and communities? Survivors of residential schools in every region of this country have told us that they have been struggling to find or reclaim that stable ground in the midst of what for them has been, for so much of their lives, lives of chaos. And the answer, which we also know, and the harsh truth is this: we used policy as a weapon. We did not hide it. We said so in our official records and correspondence. Our very first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, identified the policy issue. In his words, it was the Indian problem. The policy developed so as to address that issue, and it promised that within a generation there would be no more Indians who were not absorbed within the body politic, and no more Indian problem. The policy was both social and educational in nature. What was the strategic policy goal? To eradicate the Indian problem. What was the policy process? To create Indian residential schools, to remove Indian children from the savage and heathen influences of their parents. The operational goal? Kill the Indian in the child. Deny use of language, association with siblings, limited access to parents and home, removal of familiar food, clothing, haircuts, assignment of numbers instead of names, control, contain, and convert the parents through their children. And the desired policy outcome, the destruction or loss of an Indigenous identity, complete assimilation, loss of connection and attachment to family and culture of origin, Christianization and civilization of the savage and heathen. What was the actual policy legacy? Widespread child abuse in schools, poor educational outcomes, rejection by home communities, prejudice by wider society, underemployment, poverty, chronic addictions, family violence, criminalization, intergenerational impacts, poor health and shortened lifespans, despair, epidemic, suicide, widespread ignorance, and fractured relationships with self, with family, with nation, and between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. And here's how one residential school survivor summed it up. Government policy to save the child only ruined the families, and we have been struggling with it ever since. That struggle continues. In the field of social work, in particular, we know that there are more Indigenous children in care today than there were at the peak of the residential school era. And those numbers are growing in most regions of the country, where the biggest single cause of child apprehension is neglect. And so we might ask ourselves from a public policy perspective, how often are poverty and housing crises interpreted as parental neglect? Money is provided to foster parents to raise Indigenous children. How often or how easily is it made available to parents or extended family members to do the same extensive job? Meanwhile, the poverty remains and the child apprehension continues. And child welfare is just one example. We've been listening to National Chief Harry Bellegarde. He talks repeatedly about the gap. The 6% status of Canada as a whole in UN international measures of wellness and productivity and general well-being, but that if you separate out the Indigenous populations of Canada, it's 63rd. An actual numeric comparison of the gap that is before us. So the history and contemporary legacy of Indian residential schools begs what I think is an essential question. What are the values that underpin our policies? Have we always been conscious of them? And are we today? Have we always been honest about them? And are we today? The values behind the residential school history and its policies, which only ended in 1996 in some parts of the country, were purely these. One group of people felt it was superior to another group of people. One group of people believed that it knew what was best for another group of people, including how to raise their children, manage their lives, express their relationship with their Creator, and their own spiritual beliefs. Better, in fact, than they knew for themselves. So in the case of the Dene here, better than those who've been managing for 30,000 years of experience. One group of parents who in all likelihood could not imagine or bear the thought of having their own little ones taken away from them. Somehow thought it was acceptable and even desirable to do that by force of law, policy, and police to do that to another group of parents. And two recently arrived cultures of people, proud of their own important cultural and linguistic heritage, thought it was acceptable to impose those cultures on those they found already here, and even to beat the language out of little children while holding dear and protecting their own mother tongues of French and English. Public policy was built on such values. And this image of ourselves, I know, seems so very different from the picture that we do paint of ourselves in the world and the ones we want to hold of ourselves and the ones surely in this room that we are working towards. And what we say we are and what we stand for as a country, as Canada. We want to believe that we are so different now and that all of this is long behind us. So as we contemplate the meaning of reconciliation within our country today, and policies that would capture that, here are some things to consider with rigorous honesty. What changes may be needed, and what changes might we need to make happen? Are Indigenous peoples in the room where policy decisions are being made about their children's welfare and the child's essential need to know who they are and where they come from? Are Indigenous peoples in the rooms where decisions are being made about levels of funding for their children's education that are less than the levels of funding for other children in Canada? And I want to qualify that I'm saying this as a national story here. I know that not all of these specific questions apply to all of us. I also know that not everyone in this room is going to live here forever and always. Are we teaching the honest history of our relations with Aboriginal peoples in our professional schools and colleges and universities? Are we preparing our young social workers, our lawyers, our doctors, our judges and teachers, and of course, all of our public servants, with a truthful context for understanding where so many of their primary clients come from through their lived or inherited experiences, whether that's in emergency rooms or before the courts or at the moment of child apprehension and so on? And our Indigenous peoples in the rooms, and I know the answer to this in this territory, but where curriculum is developed to reflect a more complete history in Canada, to make Indigenous people feel proud of themselves and to make all children feel proud of the rich and shared Indigenous heritage of our shared country. Are we reflecting the three founding peoples of Canada when we design our national symbols, when we name our major roadways and buildings, when we sing our national anthem, when we greet each other on traditional Indigenous homelands, and when we commemorate our moments of remembrance and loss? Are we using the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a framework for reconciliation? Not to necessarily agree with every single clause, but to use it as a framework for reconciliation, as we recommend both in our 2012 interim report and now in our 2015 final report and summary conclusions. So if you had a chance to read the 94 calls to action of that summary report, and it was released this past June, it's available on our TRC website if you haven't. But those of you who have, you'll know that the questions I've just asked you as rhetorical questions are in fact behind many of the very specific things that we address in those calls to action. You may also be aware that the North and the Northwest Territories in particular is already leading the country in many areas of their implementation. And I almost hesitate to say this in case we get comfortable on our laurels, but in case you are not, I want to repeat something I was saying to a group I spoke to yesterday. You know, we do live in such and work in such an amazing place, and it is inspirational to the rest of the country. The NWT, with its own unique and very, very long history of residential schools, we have the highest number of survivors per capita of anywhere in the country. But we've emerged in recent years as a national leader in redress. I think thanks in very large part to the fact that we have residential school survivors sitting in our decision-making for us in our legislatures and in a number of our departments. And I think that's an important thing for us to acknowledge, because it falls to the rest of us when that generation of survivors is not there, who will be standing to speak for the need for the ongoing work. But when I talk about leadership, the first to offer an apology in a provincial territorial legislature in the country, the first to officially recognize Indigenous languages, the first and only jurisdiction to give statutory recognition to National Aboriginal Day. Outstanding also in the qualified endorsement of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In access to our jail to allow for statement gathering from residential school survivors. In the precedent-setting development and implementation of new curriculum for all our school children. Mandatory. Most parts of the country are not there. In the ongoing commitment to professional development for teachers, in the emerging commitment to professional development for other professional sectors, both inside and outside of government, and very, very, very importantly, and most recently, passing in the legislature here a full and thorough and thoughtful response to every single one of the 94 calls to action from the TRC. And I really acknowledge, and I don't know enough about who all was involved in that, so I'm going to hold back on naming names, but it is something we should collectively feel very proud of and not get comfortable with, to keep ourselves brought into the ongoing work. And today, let me just speak about today, so that we don't overlook the significance of this very day. We are right here in this room, in this People's Hall, in the midst of an uplifting example of intentionally convening in the same room to engage in shared dialogue professionals involved in the identification, design, implementation, and interpretation of public social policy, together with a sector of our population that is still living with the legacy of residential schools as survivors and intergenerational survivors. And all of this is possible through the combined efforts of the NWT chapter of the Institute of Public Administration of Canada and the Initiative for Indigenous Leadership, known as NWT. We should acknowledge and celebrate the vision and shared commitment that has brought the two of you together in this partnership. Our call to action number 57, in the very same spirit, says this: we call upon federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to provide education to public servants on the history of Aboriginal peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and Aboriginal Crown relations. This will require skills-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. And your government, our government's response, commits to that, is already engaged in that, and intends to proceed on that. And those of you who haven't yet had the call for the ongoing training that the government says you're going to get, keep asking. It does take time to prepare, and we don't have off-the-shelf curriculum for these things, but we've learned, and we learned from the education work, that part of the process of creating that curriculum can in and of itself be reconciling by bringing new partners to the table and new people into the rooms together. So I would call this gathering today a good beginning to fulfilling that call, but it is just the beginning. Reconciliation is about healing from devastating personal and collective losses, but it is also about building new friendships and new frameworks for social justice in this country with an essential goal for all Canadians. And I'm just going to check with Nina if I have time to play a short video or if I should skip over that, because if I may, it's about 9 minutes long, and it's a short video that I'd like to share with you. And I will just say for those of you who are emotional point want to dig out of Kleenex. There are points that are touching, but it captures both aspects. The losses and healing, as well as the promises and public engagement. It's a small snapshot of the national journey that we have barely begun. And it is a moving account, may I also say, that includes some familiar northern faces and one or two of you in this room, and you may recognize yourselves in this video.
Just like I have these skeleton keys, and I went through a door in my mind, and I would go to each door, and I would open them, and this one was fear, and this one was low self-esteem, and this one was sexual abuse, and the list goes on and on and on.
I remember the loneliness, the crying, and being witness to all the abuse around me.
I feel like I've been dropped from the sky. Nobody around me, strangers around me. They don't know us, I don't know them. I don't know how to socialize. I don't even know how to love.
I went through sexual abuse. I went through physical abuse, mental, spiritual. And I'll tell you, the one thing that we suffer the most is the mental and spiritual abuse that we carry the rest of our lives.
My mother and father had 13 children, and every single one of us had gone to residential school. I longed for the smell of spruce boughs and of the smoke, wood smoke. I longed for the taste of the dried meat and the dried fish. I was hungry for all of that time for my own food. And there was such a longing in my heart, such a loneliness for my people.
This individual, this perpetrator of mine, this is what the individual first heard when he was talking to me. I said, I'm sorry. I said, I'm sorry, because for the last 50 years, I've hated you, and I've wanted to kill you. That came from me. But that wasn't me speaking. That was a 7, 8, 9-year-old boy getting out whatever was still bothering him after 60, 65 years.
My youngest brother is named Michael Antoine. He's 12 years old. And my mom and I were together and we got a call. He's in the hospital. He was in residential school. I wasn't by that. I walked into the hospital and he was black and blue. I was never so shocked in all of my life. And then a few days later, we got a call. We're still in the city, my mother and I, and we got a call at night and they said he passed. It's about us, it's about my brother, it's about the children that never came back. By forgiving the church, by forgiving the abusers, and not carrying all of that garbage with us wherever we go, we invest in our own healing.
People ask me, what do you expect to achieve? The answer is freedom. I am free.
Forgiveness is not for the weak. When you forgive, you grow, you heal,
But most of all, you free your heart and you free yourself of anger, grief, blame, shame, guilt. Because anger is a spiritual sickness. But when you forgive, you actually live.
I'm proud to say that I opened those doors and I forgave.
Our failures fill us with deep regret. But as we know, regret and apology is not enough. The test of that regret and that apology, we know, will be our actions in the days ahead.
We are in the midst of a long and painful journey as we reflect on the cries that we did not or would not hear, and how we have behaved as a church. We travel this difficult road of repentance, reconciliation, and healing. We commit ourselves to work towards ensuring that we will never again use our power as a church to hurt others with attitudes of racial and spiritual superiority.
The Commission Chair, the eloquent Mr. Justice Sinclair, borrows a phrase that was used by the leaders of the American Civil Rights Movement. That phrase is, keep your eye on the prize. That sets a challenge for all of us, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, commissioners and citizens. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission will help define the prize. We as Canadians, as citizens, have to mobilize the eyes and help the larger Canadian population both see and act. Reconciliation in this context means coming together as a whole, with one purpose being to hear and to heal, and then a critical common purpose, which is to move forward together. And if we fail to do that, if we fail to go beyond apology and regret, if we admit the truth and ignore the reconciliation, that would be to repeat the profound offenses of the residential schools themselves. I believe that Canada, as a broad and generous country, could find the will to repair the damage of that past and build new partnerships if enough of our citizens know and if their eyes are turned to the prize.
So as these many voices make plain, things can and do get better, but it will take time, and we all need to play our part as individuals and as various collectives. On an individual level, changing how we see, talk to, and talk about each other. And on a societal and public policy level, changing some of what we do and a lot of how we do it. Reconciliation means new thinking about who decides, about imagining and convening ethical spaces, about consciously deciding who is present in the decision rooms of our governments, our policy shops, our social services, our schools, about who controls the resources that such decisions rely upon. As I said yesterday, and as I've said many times before that, do not allow yourselves or anyone else to get tired of this conversation. We owe that to the courage of the survivors, and we owe that to the potential of our own country. We still have so much to learn about and from each other. And above all else, in the recent shadow of more than 100 years of national negligence, we all need to keep our eyes and our hearts on the next 7 generations of children. They are counting on us, and as our future leaders, we will all be counting on them. Masicho Kwana. Merci.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson, for that very powerful and very thoughtful presentation to all of us here today. If you have time, the time still permits a period of questions and answers and discussion. Perhaps for about 10 minutes now. I'll invite anyone with a question to just raise your hand. I believe we have a microphone here. This is the microphone that we'll use. So I will bring it to you, and then I'll bring it back to Dr. Wilson. And we just want to make sure it's recorded for people in the Northwest Territories communities who will be watching this remotely. So, question, please. David?
Thanks, Matthew. Thank you, Dr. Wilson, for today's presentation. After 4 years involved with IPAC and this was far and away the best event I participated in, so thank you very much. My question is, in reading back and forward calls to action, a number of them address areas that I would fully expect: corrections, health and social services, education. The one that I found most astounding when I was reading through was the call for a new royal proclamation. And I wondered if you could just enlighten us on some of the thoughts that went into why a statement from the formal crown would be so important for this nation. Thank you.
So thank you for your comments. I'm the one non-lawyer commissioner, and I'm not a constitutional expert. But what I do know is the crown we had back then is not the crown we have today in terms of how our democracy has evolved, in terms of where our constitution is housed, in terms of the roles of the leadership of our country in the evolution of public government. But the other thing is, think of it as a national refresher course, because most of us don't know there ever was one in the first place. And we certainly don't abide by it, by and large, in an active or conscious way. And so what we talked about is trying to take the language of back then, which was binding and is very often before the courts, and to give it new breath and life as to what do we mean by that in light of the constitutional revisions, in light of the recognition of Aboriginal rights in that constitution, in light of the treaties, both the historical and number treaties and the contemporary treaties, land claim agreements. What do we mean by that? And can we, in a way that was not there with the treaties and even the Royal Proclamation, use our present-day ability to get words on the page that actually capture what both sides agree to and understand, and not have such a divide between interpretations of what one group thought it meant and what another group thinks it means. But it's to remind us, as well as with treaties. Treaties are not contract law. They are in the narrowest sense. But they were also intended to be spiritual covenants. And that is it's what I was talking about when I said what are the values behind our public policy. What is the spiritual intent? And that's what Indigenous people mean when they talk about the spirit and intent of treaties. We've lost that along the way. So that's the thinking behind it.
Any more questions, comments? Anybody wish to say any words?
Thanks very much, Marie. Tim Mercer from IPAC. I was fascinated and disturbed when you were going through the policy objectives that you were speaking about. And as hard as I try, when I listen to them, they all sounded like means as opposed to ends. The elimination of language and culture, physical, sexual, mental abuse, I mean, and I'm left feeling empty with that. I mean, was there, trying to step back into the policymakers of the day, was that it? Or was there something, in terms of your research, was there something more to it? Was it evangelical? Was it the elimination of suffering? Was it the construction of a railway? What was going on in people's minds? Or was it just what you said? And as I asked the question, I think, what things are being done today, in good faith or otherwise, that 100 years from now will be looked back upon as being terrible, poorly founded public policy.
So I want to be very clear on one point. There never was a policy, stated or otherwise, that endorsed abuse of children. I want to be really clear on that. That was something that happened because people were out of sight, out of mind, with very little supervision and a lot of cover-up. But it was never a policy intention, so that's important. It was being, I have to say, somewhat arbitrary in the kind of policy walkthrough, and maybe even rusty on their own policy recall of how we structure and frame policies. But I also know that a lot of times policies are contained to what's the thing in front of us, whereas the longer term goal is something else that doesn't necessarily get stated in this policy or anywhere else, but what we know from the correspondence. And I alluded to it perhaps too quickly. What the subduing of parents. The subduing of parents had to do with the cheaper version of the cheaper alternative to Indian wars, which had happened in the United States. Very expensive, messy, a lot of bad press, one way or another, in terms of world, except that it was so common in the exploration of the Americas. But Canada decided we couldn't afford that. But yes, it did want to have a national railway. It wanted to expand. It wanted to interpret broadly the Dominion. It wanted to expand the Dominion of Canada. And there were obstacles. And I've written about this in other contexts. And the obstacles were human. They were called the Indigenous peoples of Canada. Because they already inhabited the lands that were needed. And it was in the correspondence clearly articulated that if we gather together the children, the parents will not risk uprising or protesting, knowing that we have their children in our care and in our custody. So that was the earliest thinking, and I think it's important for us all to know that the thinking evolved over the decades, but that was the original foundational thinking behind the schools. And the schools stayed on the books in that way for a long, long, long time before anybody got around to doing anything about it. And truthfully, it was only when things started to really hit the fan in the courts that the churches and everybody else started scrambling to get off the track.
I think about the First Nations and Métis Inuit who went to get themselves recognized for themselves, and we were denied our just due for compensation, for recognition. And I wonder if there'll ever be a revisit to that, because to me it's traumatizing in itself that the state can hurt me, the state can abuse me, and then the state gets to decide whether or not I'm going to be counted into the reconciliation. So for me, that's a horror unto itself. And I also wanted to thank you at the same time. There are people like my mother who died before she ever lived, who didn't know and never heard the apology, who drank herself to death, and lived under that imposed shame. And you heard her through many, many other women, I'm sure, in her voice. And I think that I could never have done your job. The listening, the deep felt listening, and the carrying of the spirit of all of that. And I want you to know many, many times I thought of you, and I thank Creator for you, because it's a gift that you've given to us to have somebody listen. And the way you spoke today, gives me that hope that my children don't have to go through it, my grandchildren. And to hear you bring up foster care, because that's a structural inequality. I'm an extended parent, but my daughter didn't get the help. And it's almost like a discrimination against biological parents. And I have to take my grandchildren out, and I think this, if the state can give me what they give me to raise my grandchildren that I did as an extended family, they can do it for biological parents. But back to my question, do you think there'll be another opportunity for us, those of us who the state would not believe our story, who disowned us in the process, that we'll get another opportunity to be recognized again?
Well, first of all, thank you. We talked about what we call the exclusions, both in our interim report and we talked about it in our final report. And we were also very intentional as commissioners. And for those of you who don't know this context, there were many schools that were excluded. Many of the ones that were excluded were ones where significant numbers of Métis children went. Some of them were classified as day schools, and there were also regions of the country having to do with what their status was in Confederation at that point. So all of your nets here in Labrador, for example, none of those schools were accepted as part of the settlement agreement. So that's what Sandra was talking about. We did say in our interim report in the end that the issue of exclusion is in fact a huge roadblock to reconciliation. So if we're serious about reconciliation, we've got to deal with that. We tried internally during the earlier life of our commission to have those brought forward as something that we could deal with within our commission's life. We did hear from people who went and held hearings in Matsuo and in many of the Métis communities as well, Batoche and Ila Lacrosse and other places, because we felt, because our work involved the people of Canada, as it said in our reconciliation description, that gave us a wide open door to go wherever we wanted, and we did that. We tried to include them. But that doesn't deal with the financial compensation questions you're raising. So the shorter answer is to say we have a brand new government that is on the record saying it wants to establish a nation-to-nation relationship. We have a brand new government that says it accepts all of the calls to action. And we have a brand new member of parliament here who's supposed to have a conduit to the brand new government. And I would say, start talking to them and explain the things that may be not immediately or personally familiar. I think we have to help each other, teach each other, and say what are the things we want brought forward. I think we just have to keep that conversation alive, as I said, and not get tired of talking about it.
We have time for one more comment or question. We should try to know ourselves. Seeing none now, we'll conclude the presentation component. And what I'd like to do is reread to you call to action number 57 that Dr. Wilson read earlier. I'll read part of it. Federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to provide education to public servants on the history of Aboriginal peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools. She read that because that was the most relevant one, I think, to us here today as a gathering in large part of public servants. But I suggest that there's also a corresponding duty, not just on our governments, but on us as public servants. And that is to embrace those learning opportunities that are provided to us by our governments in response to this call to action. And to acknowledge the role of our profession in the establishment and operation of residential schools system in Canada. And then, on an informed basis, to do what we can to achieve reconciliation, to create those shared spaces that Dr. Wilson talked to us about today. I'd like to thank Dr. Wilson for helping us to move forward on that journey, both today and over the last 6 years. And as a token of our appreciation, both from IPAC NWT and from Denny Aho, we've made a donation in her honor to the Legacy of Hope Foundation, a national Aboriginal charitable organization whose purposes are to educate, raise awareness and understanding of the legacy of residential schools, and to support the ongoing healing process of residential school survivors. So again, thank you all for making the time to be here with us today. I reiterate the comment made by David, what I would call one of the most powerful presentations that we've had in the 3-year history of IPAC in the Northwest Territories. And I just ask you again to join me in applauding Dr. Wilson for her presentation. And finally, I'd like to thank the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories. Did I lose it? Thank you to the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories for making this great space available to us today for this presentation. And again, I'd like to thank Danny Napo for collaboration in the organization and the conception of this event. I'd like to also, again, thank the Yellowknives Dene First Nation and Chief Sangre for opening today's event and offering his prayer and his remarks. And beyond that, I'd just like to say that if you're not already a member of IPAC and you'd like to join our organization, I welcome you to Google IPAC NWT and check it out. You're welcome to come to any of our future events. And with that, that concludes our presentation today.
Thank you. That's great.
I'm going to try and share rhymes.